A lot of buzz starting last night of Dylan Raiola potentially taking a second look at Nebraska. So, at first it started as a rumble, a little bit of buzz, then Chad Simmons confirms that report. Then Steve Wiltfong of 24/7 Sports puts a crystal ball in for Dylan Raiola to be headed towards Nebraska. So at this point, it goes from buzz, rumblings to, okay, there's actually some real smoke here. This is more than just message board rumors and your buddy texting you and saying you think we're going to flip Raiola. So that's the first place I want to start this conversation with. Is this real? Is this real? 100% it's real. Real based on the people that are making reports about this. That's the first piece. The other piece of this, it got a lot more real when the official visit was scheduled from Dylan Raiola headed to Nebraska this weekend. All right, if you're happily committed, you don't schedule a visit somewhere else by nature of what I would imagine is true, right? I mean, if you are, happily dating, you're not texting other people about where you might want to be going on dates with someone else, right? Like you don't look around if you're happy. So I'm not saying Dylan Raiola is unhappy, but I am saying there is very real smoke to this whole situation by nature of him having scheduled an official visit. Also, I would tell you this. Talking to people very close to Nebraska, they feel very good about where they stand with Dylan Raiola. Very good about where they stand. So all the smoke, is this real with Dylan Raiola maybe flipping his commitment from Georgia to Nebraska? Very real. Very, very real. Hasn't happened, but there's a lot of real, and where there's smoke, there's definitely the potential for there to be some fire. Make sure you subscribe to the On3 YouTube channel. Talking college football every single day. If you want to stay locked in for all things college football, all things recruiting, all things portal, make sure you subscribe right here. We appreciate y'all so much in advance for that. So here's the main question people are going to ask right now when it comes to Dylan Raiola. Hey, why flip? Why would you flip from Georgia to Nebraska if that is what he ends up doing? And I think if he does end up flipping from Georgia to Nebraska, the most obvious answer would be, well, why does anybody make any decision when they have two good options in front of them? And to be clear, that's what we have here with Nebraska and Georgia in front of Dylan Raiola. Priorities. Making decisions comes down to priorities. And you'd have to imagine now, from the outside looking in, the priorities for Dylan Raiola, should he flip to Nebraska, greater opportunity for him to play sooner. Okay, I mean, there's obviously a tremendous amount of talent on that Georgia roster. That quarterback room is pretty crowded. For Nebraska, if he shows up there, I mean, we'll see what happens with the transfer portal and what Nebraska does, but you'd have to think you have a much less long of a line to have an opportunity to play. Other thing I would say, when it comes to the opportunity at Nebraska, you can either be the next guy at Georgia or you can be the guy at Nebraska. And what I mean by that is, at Georgia, if you win a national title as the quarterback there, get you a parade, probably get you a nice little tribute video, standing ovation from the fans every time you go back to Athens, and that would be awesome. There is nothing negative I have to say about that. That would be tremendous. That's something that most college football players dream about, especially at the quarterback position. But if you go win at Nebraska, a place that hasn't made a bowl game since 2016, that gets you a statue. I'm saying that a little bit hyperbolic, but I don't know that we're far off from that conversation. If you go win at a place like Nebraska and take them back to the college football relevance table, I mean, think about the way that you're remembered at a place like Nebraska, a place that values college football the level that they do. Also, I would say this too, purpose gives a different lens to priority for a guy like Dylan Raiola. Because what was the thing we said about him all recruitment when it came to Nebraska and his potential of committing there in the first place? Hey, family ties. Dad played there. Uncle's the offensive line coach there. You got some family ties. You got some emotional investment in a place. Probably provides a little more of a carrot to maybe bring that place back to where you think it should be in the college football landscape, where that fan base expects it to be. So in that case, I mean, the priority for Dylan Raiola to bring Nebraska back, it would be hard to argue against that. So you talk about priorities. I think there's a lot of priorities that would make sense if Dylan Raiola does decide to flip from Georgia to Nebraska. Now, there's going to be a lot of people that'll start popping off in the Twitter sphere and saying this about Dylan Raiola should he end up flipping. They'll say, well, if he flips, he's just running from the competition. He doesn't want to compete for the job at Georgia. Really? running from competition if you flip from a place like Georgia to a place like Nebraska that hasn't made a bowl game since 2016, where much more would be required of you and your abilities to get Nebraska to where you want them to be, and much more required of you as a quarterback to elevate a team to achieve your goals, and that's running from competition? From where I'm standing, I think the hill to achieve what you want if you're Dylan Raiola, if you do go to Nebraska, becomes much steeper. I think the competition level, I think, becomes much more difficult if you're Dylan Raiola going to Nebraska in a place that's still trying to get off the ground, whereas Georgia's already at cruising altitude. Now, I understand what you're saying, though. You're saying, well, he doesn't want to compete for his job in a crowded quarterback room. Ryan Puglisi, Gunnar Stockton, he doesn't want to have to wait his turn, is what people are going to tell you. They'll say, well, he doesn't want to bet on himself. To be clear, betting on yourself can look a lot of different ways. And I think either way Dylan Raiola goes here, if he sticks with Georgia or flips to Nebraska, he's betting on himself. Because if you stick with Georgia, it's very clear. You're betting on yourself to win the quarterback Hunger Games that goes on in Athens, Georgia, right? That's the obvious scenario there that would be betting on yourself. But if you flip to Nebraska, you're betting on yourself that your abilities are good enough to be the change agent at Nebraska to elevate them back to relevance in college football. Because Dylan Raiola, he wants to be an NFL draft pick. He wants to, I'm sure, achieve all the postseason accolades that are out there in college football. He wants to win big games at Nebraska. Being the quarterback, you have a very large hand in doing that. And he understands that. And he would be a very big part of that should he end up flipping. And there'd be a lot of pressure on him to do that. So again, going on betting on yourself, you're walking into a situation where you're betting on your ability to impact the positive trend of where this whole thing is headed under Matt Rhule. So either way, you're betting on yourself. I don't think it's a running from competition thing. I don't think it's a ego thing. I think it's a priorities thing. And I think it, again, is going back to what do you want to essentially get out of your college experience if you're Dylan Raiola? What is your ultimate hope whenever you do end up declaring for the NFL draft? So we'll see what happens here, but how it strikes for either side, if you're Georgia, if Dylan Raiola does flip, I think you would feel a lot like you do whenever your friend has already RSVP'd and cancels last minute from coming to the party. So that there's that initial just disappointment. Like, man, really thought he was coming. We were going to have a good time. He was going to be here with us, and we were going to go and have a good time at this party. But then as time goes on, you realize, okay, well, I have other friends coming. Still going to be a lot of fun. I'm still going to enjoy this party. Still going to be all good. And that's not to minimize the impact of a Dylan Raiola, but when you look at what you have in-house in Athens, at this point in time, number one class in the country. If Dylan Raiola were to flip, I don't know how that would impact the on-3 team recruiting rankings, but I do think they're probably still sitting in pretty good position. Also, you have the best coach in college football as your head guy right now, Kirby Smart. That alone is reason for confidence. And then you look at the quarterback room, you have not one but two 4-star quarterbacks. One in Ryan Puglisi, one in Gunnar Stockton. And this is, again, assuming that Carson Beck doesn't come back for another year, which very well still could happen at the time of us being live. So just so we're on the same page, like for Georgia, yes, it would be a body shot, but is it a devastating blow? Is it, the end-all, be-all? I think you got to look a little bit more closely to what's already in place in Athens, Georgia. Not minimizing losing a 5-star quarterback. I'm just saying you're still, I think, in pretty good shape and can still have a good time at that party. But for Nebraska, if you land Dylan Raiola, let's kind of back this up a little bit. The fact that we're even talking about this right now, I think speaks volumes of the Matt Rhule era and the impact it's having so far in Lincoln. Like the fact that we're talking about a 5-star quarterback flipping from a national title contender program year in and year out. What does that say about this staff and the way they've made some hay in the very, very short time they've been there when it comes to the recruiting trail? I think it speaks volumes. I think it speaks volumes to their reputation, to their impact. And oh, by the way, something we haven't mentioned at all throughout this segment is Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord right now is on campus visiting Nebraska. So you have not one, but two 5-star quarterbacks in play right now if you're Nebraska. That's a sentence I don't know a lot of people expected us to say this time last year. So that's the first part. The fact that you're even in this conversation should make you feel really encouraged about Matt Rhule and the impact his staff has on the recruiting trail and the way they're building this thing. Other part of this, if you do land Dylan Raiola, the projection of your team in the future, that arrow starts pointing all the way up, right? Because you still have to build the roster. You still have to recruit well. You still have to do all the things that are important to winning football games, right? Dylan Raiola isn't the eraser to whatever weaknesses this roster still has if he were to flip there. But you do have to feel a little bit like, all right, we just landed the most crucial ingredient to success in college football. Yes, line of scrimmage is important. Yes, playing defense is important. Yes, playmakers is important. But I sat in a personnel symposium right around a year and a half ago and listened to, I believe it was Bill Pulliam, speak to an entire room full of personnel department people and say, you need to make sure you have the quarterback right. If you have the quarterback right, that kind of takes care of 70% of your issues. So needless to say, you land a 5-star quarterback in Dylan Raiola, the trajectory of Nebraska football, the trajectory of what they could accomplish, you're thinking differently than you would if you were not to land him. So we'll see what happens here. Again, Dylan Raiola has not flipped to Nebraska, but has a visit set up for this official visit weekend. There's a ton of smoke, ton of excitement in Lincoln. And like I said, the people at Nebraska, the folks close to that program, they feel very good about where they stand in position to potentially flip him from Georgia. So we'll keep an eye on this thing, all right? We'll watch what happens this weekend with the official visit. We'll obviously keep our ear to the ground and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a minute of what we got going on. And we'll absolutely follow that Dylan Raiola story as closely as possible. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.